My baseline has completely changed. Back in the day, something would happen, and then in my thought world, I would make all of these detours through, for example, core beliefs and having to be, well, forced to run through compulsively these thought cycles that are not connected to what is actually happening. You're just convinced that something means something specific. You are very narrow with your interpretation and you can't get out of it. And then that means that since you're really holding on to those thoughts and think they're necessary, you don't get directly to anything, any experience, because there's always these big loops of like having to think about this and this, having to have it go through your mind, not having the option for it not to. And that is extremely tiring and just kind of sad because you're missing out on the true experience. That is to say, if you are someone who is unhappy about the way things are, and I was always. And now, this baseline has just entirely changed. Like, conflict arose that didn't specifically pertain to me, but people that I care about. And back in the day, just seeing someone I care about in distress and all of this would have immediately made me, before I had the facts or anything, be super anxious and trigger my body to be really overwhelmed. And the way I would put it is that it would make me think things, and because I was so narrow in my thought patterns and so obsessively and compulsively locked into them, that would just re-trigger my body again and again. And on top of that, there's just the lived experience of being in the presence of a distressed body, which affects your own body, but it doesn't have to mean a crisis thing. It doesn't have to be a problem unless you're assuming that these and these physical sensations are bad. And now it was really interesting to see for me that something arose that would have caused me distress before, but I didn't even have the impulse to go through all of these loops and rationalizations and justifications and calming myself down and everything. I just didn't even freak out in the first place. And that's something that is just happening more and more. And it's just very pleasant to not have to go through that. Because it doesn't mean that I can't access my emotions or that they're not, that I don't, take them seriously in a way that I don't express them or something like that. It just changes what will trigger what, in the sense that a lot of this unnecessary constant anxiety and stress that is triggered by every little thing because your interpretations are so locked in and sure that there is a problem everywhere, that's just so significantly reduced and just makes for a much more pleasant experience of life. And it's exactly this kind of change that I could see would be really hard to get used to for some, and to some degree for everyone. And I'm just speaking from a point where I've already gotten used to this new baseline a little bit. So I'm not surprised by it as much as I was when it started happening, when I started being much more, objective about my own experience. That's something that I talked about, for example, in I think my first or second video, how I was just watching my body do things, seeing how I was doing it out of a compulsion, but it wasn't necessary. And it's unfamiliar. And this is, again, the same thing people keep saying, that when you're actually learning to accept yourself better and seeing reality much more for what it is, rather than what your little identity game is cluing you in for it to be, and constantly whispering in your ear what it is, it's unfamiliar territory. It's an unfamiliar degree of just pleasantness. When you're constantly running toward things and running away from them, pushing and pulling, to use that analogy, you're constantly, contracted, and your muscles are all tense and you are rigid, and there's always a stress level in your body and you're never relaxing into what's happening. And actually not doing that is just nice for the body. There's just a niceness. Like, oh, I didn't have to get all riled up about that. How nice. And there will be moves of rebellion against that because it's unfamiliar and it hasn't proven itself through experience to be good, though it's very clear from the inside that this is right. This is yet another aspect of how this whole thing that I keep describing is self-validating. So, I suppose maybe one thing I'm also trying to say for people also going through this is don't be afraid of or reject the niceness.